Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha, and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of the world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them. After our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring to merely sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher, he is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where have you laid him? They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, "Unbind him and let him go." Here ends today's gospel.
Jesus going to Bethany. Now, I used to think Bethany was a town near Jerusalem, but there's actually several Bethanies in the Bible. That was always kind of confusing to me. But I was reading a Hebrew scholar from the region, and he said actually Bethany is a community of people. It was literally, the word Bethany means house of the poor in Hebrew. Beit is house, like Bethlehem is house of bread. That's why Jesus is the bread of life. He was born in Bethlehem. So Lazarus and his two sisters were probably generous benefactors of this community where everything was held in common. People would give up all of their wealth when they came to this house, and it was like a poorhouse. And everyone would have what everyone else had. It was all well shared in common. And so Jesus hears about Lazarus being ill, and he decides that he is going to wait 2 days before he goes to see him. And he does this because he says God's glory will be revealed. Now, if you've ever been sick or had a loved one die, the last thing you're going to want to hear is, well, the reason this happened is because God's glory is going to be revealed in this somehow. In fact, that's the people who believe that God is the kind of God that pulls strings, who has everything at God's control, and that what God does is has this plan where everything works exactly the way God wants it to. When bad things happen, that's what they say. Well, something good will come out of this. Maybe you're not as smart as God is. Maybe you've heard some of those things before. I believe that God is primarily not a God of control, but a God of love. And a God of love is not a God who controls things. In fact, it makes it really hard for God to be the kind of God that traditional theology asserts, that everything happens for a reason and it's all under God's control. So Jesus is telling his disciples, he says, he's only sleeping. And they go, really? Well then, we don't even have to go. They were a little bit afraid about going to Jerusalem, because the last time Jesus was in Jerusalem, he almost got stoned to death. And he says, well, actually, he is dead. And then Thomas makes a comment. I don't know if you noticed that when Deb read it. Thomas said, well, then we will go there too and die. And that really bothered me when I read this, because first of all, Thomas isn't very bright in the Bible. He's the one who comes in. He wasn't there, somehow must have overslept when Jesus was with his disciples. And he says, I won't believe until I see the holes in his hands and touch the hand in his side. And then, of course, he gets that opportunity. But Thomas says, we will go there and we will die. So I looked at this word, and it's called apothnisko in Greek. And apothnisko simply means to die. It's used 182 times in the New Testament. So I started looking at all of the times this word is used. And about a third of the time, it's used not to mean to die, but it means to come alongside someone who's grieving or who's hurting, or to come alongside in an empathic way someone who is in pain. I don't know if that's what Thomas was saying, but I believe that's what Jesus was doing. Coming alongside of Mary and Martha in their grief. Now, how does that show God's glory? Well, maybe God's glory is different than what we think. If you were to describe a glorious day, what would that look like?
Sunny.
What?
Sunny.
Sunny, right? What else?
Warm, about 75 degrees.
A beautiful, warm, sunny day, light breeze maybe. One of those days that you think couldn't get any better. That would be glorious. When we think about God's glory, we often think about a God who is so beautiful and amazing and perfect and holy. There's a TV preacher named John Piper, and when I Googled God's holiness to see what the internet might say about it, you could find a sermon by him. And if you ever leave this church because you don't like what I have to say, he's probably the person to go to, because we are nothing alike. John Piper says that God's holiness or God's glory is displayed in God's perfection, in God's holiness. And that God is up in heaven, and God is so far removed from anything down here, the stuff of earth, the stuff of humanness. God is perfect, so much so that God cannot exist anywhere here on earth unless that place becomes perfect as well. And his theory is that when Jesus died, he made this place perfect if we confess that for ourselves. That's a whole other sermon for another day. But I think God's glory is something different. When Jesus shows up and Martha comes out to him and says, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And if somebody said that to me, and I was late, I would have a good excuse. My alarm didn't go off. Right? Or, well, I didn't know he was dead. Because all they said was he was dying. And he's already been in the grave 4 days. So even if Jesus had left at the moment he heard that, he would not have been there in time. And then she goes and gets her sister, and her sister comes out, and her sister and the rest of the people there are weeping. They're crying for their brother. They know that, yes, in the end of time, he will be raised up just like everyone else. These communities of the poor were run by the Pharisees as a charity. The Pharisees were the group that believed in the resurrection of the righteous at the end of time. And so Jesus said, your brother will be raised. And they said, we know, we've heard it. He'll be raised on the last day. And then Jesus says something very significant. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he dies, yet will live. And then Jesus wept. John 11:35, the shortest verse in the entire Bible. If you're going to memorize Bible verses, that's a good one. It's easy. Jesus wept. What if God's glory is revealed not in God's holiness, but in God's coming alongside of people who are mourning? What if God's glory is revealed in Jesus weeping with his friends? I think that's all I got.
Okay.
There probably was more, but I can't think of it at the moment, so. Amen.